Welcome to PR Tech Wednesdays, the weekly webinar where public relations leaders come together to talk about the latest in PR tech. If it's Wednesdays, it's PR Tech Wednesday, every Wednesday, 12 to 1 Pacific time. It's free and you can sign up at prtechwednesdays.com. My guest today, Rob Key, CEO of Converseon. Great to see you, Rob.
Yeah, Eric, great to see you too. It's been a long time.
It has.
Nice to connect this way, but
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think it was actually, I checked, it was 10 years ago. I moderated a panel you were on at the Market Research Association conference in Miami.
Wow. That goes back into the days. As we were saying earlier, it's funny that even though we go back that far, a lot of the conversations I think we're both having these days are still very similar to what we were talking about 10 years ago and more, and still trying to solve for a lot of the same problems. So a lot of the technologies evolved, some of the methodologies have evolved, but some things don't change, right? So,
Well, I'm excited to dive deep into artificial intelligence, but first I want to shout out to EFF. The Electronic Freedom Foundation champions user privacy, free expression, and innovation through impact litigation, policy analysis, grassroots activism, and technology development. Now, the EFF has two free tools you may be interested in. The first is Privacy Badger, which automatically blocks invisible trackers, and the second is HTTPS Everywhere, which encrypts browser communications. The Electronic Freedom Foundation is a U.S. 501c3 nonprofit, and you can donate online at ericschwartzman.com/EFF. And our bookstagram of the week, AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the World Order, is presented by The Secrets of Successful PR. You can download the 2020 Secrets of Successful PR report and learn about how to source and hire PR at ericschwartzman.com/secrets. I absolutely tore through this book. It's by Kai-Fi Liu, and he is a Beijing-based venture capitalist and the former president of Google China. He also worked at Microsoft and Apple, always in the area of AI. And it's really a fascinating, gripping book that takes you inside the black box of AI. And for me, it provided a really easy to grasp framework for understanding AI, how it'll impact business, the job market, and much more. And it's no coincidence that this book's Instagram is about AI, because our guest today, Rob Key, is CEO of Converseon, and that's an advanced natural language processing and text analytics solution powered by artificial intelligence. So, Rob, let's do this.
Let's do it.
Okay, so you got your work cut out for you today, because I'm going to ask you to explain to us what AI is, what it isn't, and how it's going to impact PR tech. So let's start at the top, square one. At a very high level, how do you teach a machine to make a decision? You know, what's the basic rationale for artificial intelligence?
Well, in a way, it's artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a bit of a misnomer because all intelligence is still coming from humans. Artificial intelligence algorithms are taught by humans. They learn from humans. They learn from observing humans. They learn from human input. And over time, they're able to apply algorithms. There's a wide variety of algorithms that fall into the areas of machine learning and AI to be able to find patterns in that data to help replicate the kind of decisions that humans would have probably made in the same circumstance. And so it's, we talk a lot about AI, but we're really talking about augmented intelligence. And I think this is something that Gartner and others have really pushed, that we're really in the age of augmented intelligence, of extrapolating the intelligence that are within human beings to be able to do it at scale and speed that humans themselves can't do, but it's really mimicking human intelligence at that level. What we focus on is a subset of machine learning, or AI, which is natural language processing, or some people refer to it as natural language understanding, which is really a subset of natural language processing, right? So you can see all these trees of AI go into different directions. And in our area, it's about how do we use machines or software and computer algorithms to really understand and analyze human language. And human language is And I would argue this unstructured human language is so complicated, syntax and slang and sarcasm. It's one of the more challenging fields of applying AI, but it's also, I think, one of the areas where AI has the greatest advance, and it's also an area where AI is truly making a big difference in the world. So that's our little subset.
If you just think about sort of AI, the category, the broad category, how big is this? I mean, is this as big as electricity? How big
Yeah.
a technology is this?
Yeah, it's something that, I think a lot of people who might be watching this are almost jaded by the AI buzzword. Everybody throws the word AI into it. AI focused solutions, etc. Sometimes they're very basic Bayesian. Sometimes it's very specific A/B testing type work, and I think it's a stretch to call that AI. But AI itself is, being modest about it, is going to be absolutely game changing. It's more analogous to me as electricity because it's pervasive and everywhere. It's going to feed, if and it's beginning to already, the intelligence behind both our companies' insights, actions, media, etc. It's as with 5G coming, there's going to be AI built into appliances. This data is going to be everywhere, and I would say it goes further from electricity because real AI isn't going to be just replicating decisions based on humans that it's seen before, but it's actually going to eventually take action on the data. Based on seeing this is what we are going to do. That's real artificial intelligence. We're not there yet, but that's where we are going. And I think every human activity, I think Peter Ning at Google said, look, anything that a human can probably think of doing in less than a second, we'll probably be able to replicate. For what we do, if we have three humans look at something and agree that it means something specific, whether this means this is an expression of trust or this is positive sentiment, we can get machines to be able to replicate that at scale and at a scale and speed that humans can never attain. So all things that humans do that are very repetitive over some point of time will probably be replaced by some form of machine learning or AI over time. The
Just to
decision-making
just to ground
process.
us,
Oh,
just
sure.
to ground us in reality for a second here, because I think there's a lot of fear about a dystopian future where, there'll
Right.
be no jobs. What's the difference between like a machine that can spot correlations in data and make predictions and machines that actually can do anything a human can do?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference for now. I think most of the work that's going on is pattern recognition. So it's doing a great job of saying, hey, based on all the data that we've seen in the past, this is probably what is going to happen based on these predictions. And it's only as good as the data that is actually input, right? So a lot of the problems with building good machine learning models or algorithms is that the training data is incomplete. And so that your predictions are going to be incomplete. But once you have that data, so for what we do is, we can get to things like sentiment and emotion. We can analyze the massive amounts of social data conversation in real time in massive scale in ways that humans would never be able to do. So we can get precisely to the conversations about a particular topic, and then also the expressions around sentiment or trust or other things that are associated with that in ways that it would take humans thousands of man hours to be able to do that. But once you have that data, there still have to be decisions made on that. And that's where I think humans are still going to play an important role. Like, what do you do with this data? Again, the aspirational views of AI are that the machine will someday be able to say, well, look, over here, our reputation score happens to be underperforming around this particular topic. So let's generate new content that fills that gap. And with natural language generation technologies, it may even start to create content to fill that gap, right? But that is a ways off. And I would also argue that that's not always optimal, right? I think that we're quite a far away from this general intelligence and AI that's going to be able to replace humans and make judgments in ways that humans do. Creativity is something that machine learning models don't do a great job on, right? If humans are great at seeing two disparate ideas and concepts and finding some correlation or idea between them, um, AI doesn't do that very well. AI doesn't do a good job with I hate to talk about this coronavirus, what's happening right now too, but all the economic modeling that is based on machine learning and predictions based on the economy, based on data, structured data, etc., never was able to take into account something like coronavirus, which we consider like a black swan, something that you would never see from historical data because we haven't seen anything like it before. And that's absolutely new and a new variable being put in that AI doesn't do a good job with, right? So I think we have a long way to go in terms of replacing humans, and I think that for PR folks, this technology is just supposed to make the stuff that is redundant for you much easier, so you can get to the data into your fingertips, so that you can actually take action on the data in ways that are much quicker and much more efficient than what you could do in the past.
So we hear so many people talking about the importance of data and the value of data. And, we've heard the prediction that data is now more valuable than oil. Why is data so important?
Well, data is the fuel to help. Everything around AI and machine learning is based on the premise that what we've seen historically and the patterns we've seen in data historically can help us predict the future. That's really what it's all about. If it's really just about looking at data historically for its own sake, it doesn't really give us insight into the future. So, but what we do know is because patterns that have happened in the future, in the past, often become the same patterns we can predict in the future are going to give us the ability to be able to make decisions around business better, faster, cheaper. We're going to be able to take advantage and build new products faster. We're going to find the new ideas for new products faster. We're going to be able to understand what's happening to our reputations more quickly and take action on it. So you're going to be able to have insights and information more quickly than your competitors, and that is competitive advantage. But the problem isn't like who has the most data right now. I mean, companies are drowning in data. What we deal is with unstructured data, and unstructured data, a lot of it is social data, but it's other voice of customer data. So think of call center transcripts, survey verbatims, etc. There's massive amounts of input that customers and the consumers are telling you about what they want, but companies can't process it. That's the bottleneck. In fact, Forrester has a study that says companies are only processing about 22% of their unstructured data, but that unstructured data is growing 80% year over year. So I think of it as a little bit like, talk about oil, kind of mining for oil. There's this massive resource of insight that companies are sitting on, but they're only mining a small portion of that data and the insights. And because it's really hard to do, human language specifically is very complicated. Language changes over time, slang, sarcasm, as I mentioned earlier. It's like, how do you get insights out of this massive data set? So I don't think it's about more data. I think it's about smarter data and data that connects across the organization, so that your voice of customer data is talking to your social data, which is talking to your mainstream media data, which is talking to your survey data, and unifying that data together in a way that you can get a comprehensive view of what's really going on and not live in these silos like most companies currently do.
Rob, what is a neural network?
A neural network is a form of machine learning and AI that, so there's a bunch of different algorithms when you talk about machine learning. So I'm talking about how do you do pattern matching and how do you train algorithms that are very effective to predict the outcomes. And sometimes it's decision trees and logistic regression and all these other kind of things, data science-y things. Neural networks are obviously the up and coming and becoming pervasive other type of model that uses something called back propagation to be able to kind of understand and predict patterns over time. The challenge with neural networks is, well, number one is they're based a little bit more on biology. So like you think of like they have nodes, which are like human synapses, and the more information that passes through these synapses, the more that it adjusts the base. It's really about how humans, as you get more information into your system and your synapses, you're able to pick up on concepts and underlying kind of meaning that you would not really find from a just traditional machine learning model. The problem with And it's very pervasive, for example, we use it for natural language processing, but it's very pervasive in image recognition. Um, there are problems with neural networks, though, and they they've been described by some folks as being very brittle. You need massive amounts of data, for example, to be able to train a neural net, and an AR. It's massive amounts. The second thing is there's a black box. They're very opaque. We don't know how they actually work. So if I build a machine learning model using decision trees to tell you how sentiment is, I can go back and describe why we were able to predict that. With a neural net, with deep learning algorithms and neural algorithms, you can't. It's all black box. We don't know how that works. All you can do is retrain data and hope something gets better on the output. And the problem with that is, and this is where you talk about dystopian. I don't think we like models that we don't completely understand, right? We want models that are explainable, that are transparent, that they have some level of fairness, that we know how they work, right? So just an example of this is if, for example, and there's all kinds of problems around bias in neural, by the way. Some very well known. You published like the Word2Vec stuff at Google, where it was actually predicting potential criminals because it took a database of potential of all kind of mugshots historically, right? And it said, take a look at photos of people and predict if they're going to be criminals or not. And based on that, they were over-indexing African Americans. But it was because the training data itself was biased, right? Because of it wasn't reflective really of criminals per se. It was against the database that was biased as it was, so that it was predicting negativity. Well, this becomes a problem when you start to adopt these types of models within law enforcement, or if you're going to make predictions about recidivism, et cetera, that these models are biased because the input has been biased, but also that the models are actually within the bias. There's no way to adjust those models in a way that are fair and transparent or explainable. You can't go back and say to folks, this is why it predicted that. And that black box is what's concerning, I think, for a lot of people, because as we automate more processes in organizations, they're going to rely more on these models. If, for example, FICO scores, I think, are a good example. If right now, if you get denied for a credit card, there is a way to kind of go back and say they're explanatory of kind of why you were denied your credit score. But as we go to more of these black box neurals, there's going to be no way to really explain why that decision was made, and no way to kind of intercede on what that process is. And that's what scares people, because it's a lack of control over these models. And so neural is very powerful. Again, it's one of many different algorithms that can be used, but it isn't a panacea, and there are problems with it. The other thing just around that is that, if it's trained for something, it doesn't do a very good job on another task. It's very, very narrow on what it can be trained for. And what we're trying to get to is AI that has broader application, that contextualizes better, that can be used more broadly than a very narrow purpose. So a bit of a long explanation, but there are a bunch of different flavors out there of AI. And as PR folks, I don't know if you necessarily need to know that, but what I think you need to keep in mind is that just because neural is kind of sounds like the biggest, more sophisticated thing, there are other algorithms that are more specific and a little bit more simple that can actually solve your problem better than trying to go to at something like a neural network.
So there are two areas we're starting to see AI show up in the media monitoring space, and those two areas are relevancy and sentiment. And when we say relevancy, we're talking about using machines to distinguish between things like Apple the fruit and Apple the computer company. The tougher challenge is sentiment, since the same article could actually have multiple sentiments towards different concepts, but automated media monitoring systems typically render them all good or all bad. So talk to us a little bit about relevance and sentiment. Where are we with them today, and where are we going?
Yeah. So this is in the weeds. Our technology is used we have API integrations with many of the leading social listening and media monitoring platforms. So um, we, if you think about it, think about ecosystems where these models that we build for sentiment, but also not just sentiment, but for emotion, for things like trust, for things for customer experience and advocacy, much more complex concepts. We have machine learning models for, and the machine learning models are built by industry because language differs by domain very much. So, small is good for smartphones, bad for hotel rooms. So these models are available through a lot of media monitoring platforms, a lot of social listening platforms. The media monitoring space has recognized that they've been applying pretty primitive approaches to trying to understand sentiment in an article. And the challenge is that let's just talk about sentiment. So for most sentiment analysis, even basic sentiment, humans don't often agree with each other. In fact, if you have three individual humans who look at something around sentiment, like they'll often disagree. In fact, they agree about 60 to 80% of the time. So it's very subjective. So if you're building a machine learning model based on a single person's opinion, you are by definition already likely not getting to the ground truth. All models that we build have three independent humans who look at the same record, and they have to get to agreement, or there's an adjudication process around things like sentiment, right? So that's just basic sentiment. Now, take other new variables in the data that people are moving beyond sentiment, and they want to move on to say, is this an expression of trust or not? Somebody may like me, but do they trust me? Well, people don't say, I trust X brand, right? They'll say, I use the product with my baby at night because my baby sleeps better. It is an expression of trust. There is no keyword in that expression that says trust, but it is trust. So the best of machine learning now is able to classify language even when keywords are not there, right? So the real measure when you as a consumer of these analytics that are coming through your media monitoring or your social listening should be something called precision and relevance. You talk about it, you express it in a slightly different way. We actually talk about it as precision is how well does that annotation of sentiment or trust or whatever it might happen to be match the three independent humans, the ground truth, right? That's the precision. Do we get it right or not? Not against a single user, but against multiple users. The second challenge is recall. So precision and recall. So recall is of all the signals that are within an article, are you capturing every expression of opinion or not? So most articles don't have an article and simply say this is positive or negative. There's usually multiple expressions of opinion within that article. On one hand, the leadership made the announcement. On the other hand, the product did not sell well. Whatever it might happen to be, you have to tease out each expression of opinion. Now, it's really easy to have high precision and low recall, meaning, I can just pick out the most obvious stuff and I won't have many signals to it. In fact, most media monitoring gives one signal to an article. Like this article is generally, positive. Or you can have a lot of recall, which means I tease out every expression of opinion in that article, but my precision goes down. So, right, it's kind of that seesaw. So what you want to do is, in an ideal world, if you really want to evaluate this in detail, is you need to do something called an F1 score, which is essentially how well the model works of capturing the highest precision. I want to get as many of those signals right as possible, but I also want to be able to get as many of those opinions as possible out of the data set. And I want to find that perfect balance between those two. What we found is testing on media articles that if you do something called target level analysis, which again is capturing every expression of opinion in that article, that you get about 700% more signals out of that same data set than a document level, which means I'm just going to score this document for positive or negative. I know it's a little bit in the weeds, but when you're thinking about this as a consumer of this data, you think about you're going to report to your C-level suite about this. You need to know exactly how good your data is performing, how precise it is, because you're going to make business decisions out of this, and how complete the analysis is by making sure that you get as many signals out of the data set as possible, recall. So F1 is a concept in data science that is well adopted. Every model that we deliver, that we use with clients or partners has an F1 score. Think about it as like a labeling law for like you're buying soup, right? Or you're buying food. You want to know exactly how good that model performs before you decide to take that data and report on it to your CEO and make business decisions out of this. I would advocate to everyone, if you're whatever listening platform you're using, whatever media monitoring you're looking for, if they're giving you data, ask them a simple question: how good is this model performing? Right? What's your precision and recall score? And then you can actually start to kind of report with this stuff with greater efficiency.
Let's take a step back for a second, because when we monitor media in PR today, we basically use keywords and phrases.
Right.
And so we're using keywords and phrases, but we're really interested in concepts. Like we're
Right.
trying to get our finger on people talking about topics, or, we're trying to get some sense of meaning.
Right.
Yet we rely on these Boolean queries, this, not that, this and this or that. And the challenge, it seems like, pretty much with every automated platform, is like not getting a bunch of irrelevant stories that we don't
Yeah.
want. That's the first challenge. And the second challenge is overfiltering so that we miss
Yeah.
stories that we should get. So when is AI going to be able to deliver value in the space so that, we're not
Yeah.
reliant on Boolean queries to monitor concepts and topics?
Yeah, it's a great question. The good news is it's here. So Boolean queries are commonplace. They're often a good starting point to start to kind of filter this data a little bit, right? But most conversation in social data specifically is implicit. I gave you an example earlier about trust, but if I say to you, I spent my entire lunch hour yesterday trying to exchange my ticket at American Airlines, you know that to be negative and frustration and about customer experience. But there's no word in that phrase that connotes that, right? So the beauty of Boolean queries are relatively primitive but necessary technology as a starting point to be able to start to filter this data. The layer up from that is the application of these machine learning models that are not keyword dependent at all, but they classify language as humans classify language, even when keywords are not prevalent. And the way that works is we for example, I keep bringing trust up, but trust is a good example of this stuff. Is that um, expressions of trust are very nuanced. Again, people don't say I trust X brand. They'll use it in all types of different ways. Like I'll never leave home without it, whatever it might happen to be. The machine learning models have been trained by humans who have a definition of what trust is. We've spent years of humans actually coding examples of conversations that are trust related, even when the keywords aren't present. And if you do that good enough, then the model is actually going to be able to find and categorize conversations about trust with high accuracy, even that are highly nuanced when those keywords are not present. So we currently, for example, uh, I'll give you a great example of how this works. And these models, by the way, are made available. If you happen to be a user of Brandwatch, for example, or Linkfluence, or some of these listening platforms, our machine learning models are pre-built for trusts and by industry, because I mentioned all these things are by industry. So if you're automotive and you want a trust model, they're available immediately to deploy to your data, and they complement your Boolean queries, but they're able to get to much greater interesting classification of this data than you can do through Boolean queries. So what does that do? That opens the door to all kinds of use of social data in ways that you haven't been able to do before. A good example is one of the world's largest car sharing companies, will remain nameless, wanted to be able to measure its brand and reputation at scale using social data because they can't wait for the survey-based results, right? By the time you're trying to do a survey tracker on do you think I'm innovative? Do you think I'm safe? Do you think I'm? By the time you get that data, it's too late. The world moves too fast. So the ask is, could we use social data to understand in real time the key dimensions of our data of our brand that go way beyond sentiment? So for this particular brand, things like safety were really important. Um, things like leadership and vision and innovation. So again, people aren't saying this brand is so innovative. Okay, maybe a very small subset of conversation may say innovation, but the majority of the conversation are things that are much more nuanced or conceptual. You know, isn't that cool? It reminds me of the Jetsons. How amazing is that? So we were able to, with machine learning, able to classify all that language to those attributes, safety, innovation, etc. When no keyword is present, with a level of precision and recall that I talked about earlier, that predicted the outcomes of their survey-based brand trackers 12 weeks in advance. So we are now able to understand in real time. Just think about it as a global nerve center. And by the way, these models were done in 8 different languages. So we're able to understand in real time not just our sentiment, but these underlying powerful concepts associated with our brand that are expressed in human language, using AI to classify language like humans do, and by the way, with greater accuracy than humans do. Because if I'll go back to those individual humans don't agree with each other 60 to 80% of the time. Algorithms have consistency, so they're able to outperform. They're about, most of these models are about, have an F1 score of 8.80 or better, meaning it's it's a higher score than what humans can do, but at vast scale. So that's where we are. AI and machine learning have now been able to take over this classification process from humans to classify language at scale and with great meaning in ways that have quantitative value, that are actually able to predict. I was talking about predicting survey-based results, but in other cases have been able to predict sales, predict stock price, etc. So it's unleashed an entire new generation of your old social listening that you've kind of been doing, maybe in a box. It's kind of interesting, kind of qualitative, interesting, is completely changing through AI to be predictive and prescriptive, and giving companies a leg up and getting insights better, faster, cheaper than their competitors. And that's a big deal.
So there are media outlets out there that are using AI to figure out, what their headlines should be, what people engage
Yeah.
with.
Mhm.
BuzzFeed in the U.S., Tutio in China. They both have algorithms that basically generate and optimize headlines and articles. So beyond SEO, are there any tools out there that PR people can use to optimize headlines and articles?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting area. There's a lot of stuff around. Again, a subset of natural language understanding, natural language processing that we've talked about, is natural language generation. And you see it in your emails sometimes, right? You're trying to it auto completes for you. It's a form of natural language generation. Um, I think that I think there's 2 schools of thought to this. One is some of natural language generation can be useful because if you're going back to kind of optimize your press release for a certain keyword phrase that people most search for, then you're actually pulling from a pool of data that says, if you really want to try to get the most eyeballs for this, use these keywords. And I think that's fine, right? But, the best content often is, stuff that it can sound very generic, right? That's the problem. If you want your language to become very generic, natural language generation is the way to go, because it's looking at all these other patterns that it's seen in the past of words associated with each other, and it's telling you what it's seen in the past. If you want to kind of create more creative language, more creative concepts, etc., you need to break away from that. Again, AI isn't very creative. It's based on what it's seen historically, and it's going to make recommendations or predictions based on what it's seen. in the past. I know in some of the best public relations strategies I've seen in the past were around the idea of creating a concept or a word that is ownable, and generating it, it creating momentum around that concept as well. There's another technique though, because you asked specifically about that, and that is there's something called organic topic discovery that social listening can do. Our technologies can do this as well, and basically what it does is uses a technique called LDA without getting into the very technical about it. But basically, if you are into ice cream, you're an ice cream company, and you want to know what are the new topics and trends that are emerging in the conversation currently that I don't really know about. Then what you can do is you can take the whole conversation about ice cream, right? However you define it. You can start with a Boolean and ice cream, whatever it might happen to be. Throw all the data into the tool, and it will start to bubble up words to concepts, concepts to themes, etc. And you'll be able to auto discover all these concepts and topics that you didn't know to look for. And that can be very powerful, right? Because all of a sudden it's not like I'm going to go ahead and create content that I think is going to resonate with an audience, but I'm actually going to look at what the audiences are already talking about, what's trending, what's important to them, and then use that as a platform to generate new content. And why that's important is, I think, with all of ad tech or social listening or whatever it might happen to be, is you often tend to find what you look for. You have a preconceived notion. We all have confirmation bias. You build your content, you put it out there. It's very rare that we actually go searching for what we call the knowable unknowable. I hate to say quote Donald Rumsfeld. It's the stuff we know, the stuff we don't know, and the stuff we know we don't know. Well, we can now discover the stuff we know we don't know through organic topic discovery. And so any of you can Google the concept LDA, organic topic discovery. There's some open source tools that you can play with to get to this data. Some of the social listening platforms and other tools have this capability. We have this capability. And it's another way outside of search that you can start to align the creative and copy that you want to create with stuff that the audience is looking for and demanding.
But I mean, in terms of the advantage that BuzzFeed and Facebook and 2TIO have using AI to generate headlines to make their content addictive, to keep us around for longer, there's
Right.
nothing comparable open source that you can dump an article or a press release into and get a recommended headline?
Yeah, most likely there are solutions out. I know there's a lot of people working on this. As for a specific tool offhand that might be available to do it, I don't know of any specifically offhand, but certainly the technology is at the point where that is a capable use of AI and machine learning, but it's all based again on training data. It's looking at all the different headlines, and it's optimizing it. This really isn't a heavy use of AI in a way. It's creating multiple versions of articles with different headlines and understanding which ones are generating the greatest clicks, and then optimizing that copy and content based on what's driving the greatest number of clicks. It's multivariate testing, in some ways is kind of what some of this is. Can there be an AI component behind it? Yeah. Machine learning component behind it? Yeah. I mean, some of the more advanced multivariate testing is using machine learning anyhow. It's, and so I think that can be useful, but I think that, I still just on a personal level believe kind of substance over style a little bit, and that really good content will win because it will be forwarded, it will be shared. You'll have return visitors, etc. than clickbait. And I think that's a danger for the space of how you really measure the impact of your content. I gravitate to things like Medium, for example, where there's high quality content and versus clickbait. But it just depends how you're measuring your campaign. If you're looking to do something that's going to have an impact on your brand over time, substance I think matters. if you're just looking for clicks and reporting on clicks, well, clickbait works.
So compared to news and user-generated content, press releases are somewhat structured. I mean, they have a dateline, they have an issuing source, they have a boilerplate, and they often
Right.
use AP style. So does that structure make press releases easier to analyze and optimize? And how could algorithms help us write better press releases?
Yeah, I think that, again, we're on the side of consuming these press releases and user-generated content and opinions to make sense of them, tease the meaning out of them, and reporting them back to companies so that they can improve their product or, take initiatives to improve their reputation or whatever those might happen to be. So we're kind of on the consumption side of all of those things. What we find is um, our machine learning models are usually, we built them to really work with social data, which is a little bit more messy, a lot more slang and sarcasm and complexity of meaning and context, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Press releases, sometimes express less emotion, but you can still, and a little less kind of sentiment. So sometimes you get less meaning out of those specifically. They're a little bit like, for example, if they go through some social listening tools, they'll come back as neutral a lot of times, right? They're just kind of declarative. Um, so from a consumption basis, I mean, from a processing basis on our end, they're a little bit more simple to do than the Wild West of social data to process. In terms of the other side of the equation, how can these things make you write better releases? I think it goes right back into the natural language generation technologies that exist. I actually did a podcast not long ago, a couple weeks ago, with Chris Duffy, who has a new book out on AI, and he used natural language generation to help write the book. That was kind of the whole concept behind it. And he has some really interesting stories, and I would encourage anyone who's interested, Google them, check them out. And he has some interesting points of view about the experience of working alongside with AI to help write a book, but he found it useful in many cases. So there definitely is an application to building press releases more efficiently, divining into the conversations to see what keywords are used, most prominently, and trying to embed those keywords into your press release. So hopefully that they're found more easily. All of that is there. But I don't think it solves the point that, people are still looking for meaningful content. And a press release to me is just another form of corporate content or company content. It's one variation of it. And so I would really encourage people to look more broadly than the press release and think about how you can use all this data to inform an overall content strategy. And that gets into the organic topic discovery. What are people talking about? What do people care about? How do I align my content with that?
Just because you are so knowledgeable about AI, and I know it's not your focus, but this is a PR tech webinar. So just
Right.
I do want to focus in on press releases for a sec here and just kind of get your opinion as an expert on this subject. So when you think about something like an earnings release that a public company is
Right.
going to make, is there anyone out there, trying to decipher the relationship between the nature of those disclosures and the company's stock price?
Yeah. Yes. So yes, it's not. And here's our experiences. So this is work that we do. So we have, for example, we do econometric modeling, but what we're measuring is not the press release itself, but what is the consumption of that press? What are the perceptions that have been generated from not just that press release, but all company content, advertising, and everything else, right? Everything that a company is communicating creates an impression and a perception, and that perception either generates trust or distrust, generates advocacy, it generates enthusiasm, and it generates and it's an impact. So those perceptions we've been able to demonstrate correlations between your trust score, how well you're trusted, for example, and stock price, right? So that work is, and that work, some of this work is published. So it's, it's your brand attributes that, it's the reputation that you engender. So your reputation score, for example, which is a contributor of many things, your social responsibility, your customer experience, the quality of your products, and all these other things. We actually have a reputation model that has all these inputs based on consumer perceptions that are fed into this, so that those reputation models do tend to correlate with higher business performance than and companies who have score low on their reputation score underperform the market. And so this is connecting all these dots together is absolutely it. I think what happens for a lot of corporate comms people is you're putting a lot of content out there, you're placing articles, et cetera, and you're creating, you can look at clicks and you can look at pass alongs and all of these other things, right? But you don't know how well all of those activities are actually impacting the underlying reputation and the underlying kind of brand attributes, whether it's trust or innovation or whatever those happens to think. And those are those things. Those are your key metrics that are correlative to business performance, right?
So when you think about this reputation score that you're putting together, you're taking in all this data from I imagine clicks and comments and reviews, all this online data. But we're in this environment now where all this offline data is starting to get collected as well, right? I mean, we've got Siri, we've got Amazon Echo, we've got, bike and scooter rentals, we've got mobile GPS, we've got surveillance products like the Ring doorbell. Have you given some thought? And I mean, can you share how that type of data might be used to improve the reputation score or make it more accurate?
Yeah, well, right now that's a sensitive area, right? And for good reason. I mean, you look at even Cambridge Analytica and some of the things that happen there. So we're very, very careful when we are listening on a broad level to in many cases we're not getting to personal identifiable information. We're looking at broader trends and things like that because it's a sensitive issue. So privacy is a big issue in this particular area. Where we see unification happening is companies now taking their social listening data, right? And a really good statistic I should just throw out there, that for those who are doing social listening and you're just kind of doing sentiment based on the data for your brand, if you really peel back the layers, only about 20% of that conversation is coming from consumers. The rest of it is job listings and advertising and all this other crap that's in this. You're kind of polluting the data set. So when you get to understanding the real true voice of customer, that data has to be cleaned out. And we have voice of customer models that clean that data out. Then you look at trust, then you look at advocacy, then you look at these other things. But where we see the convergence happening is social data now starting to connect with mainstream media data. So you have, but that's not a surprise. There's an article and this is how people are talking about it or whatever might happen. But then you have a lot of other customer feedback data. So net promoter stuff with a little survey based. They have long form survey verbatims. They have call center transcripts. And so these are all expressions of voice of customer that are starting to be unified at companies so that it's all starting to talk to each other, right? You start going to the next step, which it gets into, things about Siri and Alexa and those areas. I don't think we've enough clarity in the market ethically. I mean, anywhere that, frankly, the type of technology we have works with any expressed form of customer generated content. If you start with language, and this happens, Google's talked about this, like with Alexa, it's being transcribed into text, right? So anywhere that it has text, our technologies can then analyze and glean out the opinions and the wants and the needs and the hopes and all of that stuff. The question is, should we? And that's the bigger issue of, can we? Yes, all that data can be made available. Should we start to be able to pull data from these other forms that are, I think, that are perceived as a little more personal, is an area that we tread very, very carefully in.
Well, I mean,
Um,
understanding that, there obviously are, very sensitive privacy issues, but you think about something like an app that you download from a company that provides you with access
right,
to their services. And when you download it, you agree to the terms of service. So they are collecting data about you. That's not necessarily language data. They might know how
right.
much battery I have on my phone, what model phone I have, if it's a new phone or an old phone, where the
Right.
phone is. Are you seeing any of those types of data sets be compared to natural language processing to improve the accuracy of reputation scores?
Uh, yes, and I'll give you a specific example for another. I was talking earlier about a car sharing service we work with. Um, we were able to correlate. There was a protest movement surrounding this brand where there was a boycott initiative around this
Just
brand,
say
right?
Uber already, man. We know you're talking
Well,
about
it's
Uber.
well, there are others in that space, but and by the way, this is stuff that we've presented with them publicly, so I think we're okay with that kind of stuff. But we were able to predict, based on that social conversation, that was able to predict the number of app deletes, right, and app downloads over a period of
Mm,
time. So we're able to see
hmm.
the correlation between of those things.
Right.
And so this is the connection of dots that we're talking about, that we're starting to be able to look at the impact of this, because we can now classify this language data with great precision and great accuracy and great nuance. And we're showing that it has predictive value, and then we're now able to link that stuff to business determinants, whether it's an app download, some other type of behavior, whether it's product sales. In a particular case for a big food company, we were able to actually predict product sales about 113 different products in the organic space 6 weeks in advance, right? So, and that's really what the holy grail is, right? So that we're able to take this internal data, this first party data with this social data, and we're able to now do great levels of sophisticated cleansing and analysis on this data, and then running correlations and regression analysis and predictive analytics on this data. And that's why I would say, going back to the very beginning, why does this matter? Because it isn't what happened to you yesterday. We're now predicting what's going to happen to you tomorrow. And when we do a lot of product innovation, like whether the new flavors that are coming, or, if you're a big CPG company, is it coconut water, or what happened to kale, or whatever it might happen to be, we can start to predict these trends, which are the trends that are going to become most prominent, and are actually it's significant enough to build a business off of up to 6 months in advance, right? So we're talking about tomorrow. We're looking at yesterday's data to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And the mechanism for that is AI and machine learning. And the data that powers that is unstructured social data. And so it's a really powerful time. This is going to be, it's already transforming um, market research, customer experience, product innovation, and absolutely having a significant impact in corporate comms and reputation in ways that companies are only scratching the surface of. It's the days ahead are going to be very cool.
If you had a magic wand and you could use it to create any sort of AI product to optimize PR, what would you create to minimize and eliminate the common friction points that public relations specialists wrestle with?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I would connect a lot of dots around things that already exist, right? So I have a new announcement to make. Um, I think that what I want to do is make that announcement in a way that's going to be most impactful, and I'm going to use natural language understanding, natural language generation to help in that process. I'm going to make sure that that's aligned, because I know who is having the conversations and what they care about, and I'm going to align that content right to their needs. Then, as we distribute it, I'm going to know precisely not just the number of clicks, but pass alongs and everything else. I'm going to be able to understand precisely the impact of that initiative on our company's reputation, and on a deep level of did that impact or the perceptions of innovation, or was it about social responsibility or brand purpose, and that impacted that positively. And by the way, I'm now going to connect that model towards a business determinant like stock price. So I'm no longer doing these things in a vacuum. I'm understanding the full ecosystem of how all of this is going to connect to each other. And I'm understanding clearly the impact of what I'm doing on a business outcome. And I'm going to understand what works well and what doesn't work well so that I can become more efficient with what I'm doing over time. So right now, all of that I talked about sounds like a dream, but all of that stuff exists. It just isn't connected together yet. And it needs to all be wired together. And that's advanced analytics, that's data science, that's social listening, mainstream media data, predictive analytics, and content generation. All that stuff wrapped into a wrapper, and put that together. And I think it's going to be part of what redefines public relations and communications going forward. I think I might have lost you. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Well, now I can see you. Yeah, you cut out for a few minutes there. Sorry about that.
That's all right. You see the chart?
Let me see if I can pull it over here.
I'm sharing my screen. It should be below.
Okay. Yes.
You see the chart? This
Yes.
is
Okay, I see it.
this is a risk of replacement chart in the
Mhm.
cognitive sector, and this is from the bookstagram of the week, AI Superpowers. And
Right.
so what he's done is he's sort of made this 2x2 model. At the top is jobs that are highly social. At the bottom are jobs that are asocial. On the left are jobs that are optimization based. And then on the right are jobs that are creativity based. And interestingly enough, he's got in the safe zone PR director.
Mm.
Then,
Yeah.
in the danger zone, telemarketer. And then he's got these other areas he calls human veneer and slow creep.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to just sort of go through the different jobs to be done in public relations today, where would you plot them? Which of these has a future and which doesn't? Where would you put media
Yeah.
monitoring?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that media monitoring is definitely optimization based. I mean, look, I think the way I think this is an interesting way to look at it, and just kind of first glance, I kind of look at the world a little, maybe a slight different twist on this, which is what are things that are repetitive versus what are things that are creative. What are things that are, where do you, and everything that's repetitive is kind of where the machine learning, the media monitoring, the sentiment analysis, all
But
of
if
that
but it, but if
stuff.
you're providing compassion repetitively, then that's going to favor the human experience.
I would say yes. So I would put public relations is I think part of public relations falls into both categories. Some of it is repetitive, some of it is about optimization, all the data that AI and machine learning can, replace all that stuff that is repetitive for you. So maybe think about a workload, 60% of that workload could be optimized better, faster, cheaper through technology, augmenting humans, not replacing humans, but like learning from your intelligence, and freeing up the public relations to get to the more creative side of what do we do with this? What are the ideas that spring from this? Where are the opportunities that I see here? So we'll be able to tell you that your reputation score dropped this much this month, and by the way, that predicts that your stock price, for example, may, drop by 5% over the next 6 months, whatever it might happen to be. What do you do about it? Is where I think corporate communications and PR have to be. That's a very strategic, a very creative place to be sitting on. I think that corporate comms should be leveraging AI to get to get rid of that repetitive stuff, or just to make it easier, streamline that repetitive stuff so you can get to the stuff that's really meaningful. And by the way, being able to talk to your C-suite and saying, because of what we're doing is having this impact on business value. It's a conversation that I think that the industry has always wanted to have, and I think we can now do it.
And Rob, this is a conversation that could go on forever, and I wish we had the time to do it, but it is the top of the hour. So I want to give another shout out to EFF, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, protecting your personal privacy online. And you can find out more information at ericschwartzman.com/EFF. And I want to thank our gold sponsors. Flux Branding is a world-renowned resource for defining your visual brand. Flux Branding is a group of creative visionaries and graphic designers dedicated to helping conceptualize and realize brand identities. Visit them online at fluxbranding.com. And Digital Dragon, where children can develop the skills they need to prosper in the age of machines. Digital Dragon teaches digital literacy to tomorrow's programmers and technology entrepreneurs. More information at digitaldragon.com. And thanks again to our guest, Rob Key, CEO of Converseon. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
Join us
I
next
appreciate
week.
it. Thanks to everyone else.
Join us next week for a discussion about PR tech in practice with Ron Terosian, the CEO of 5WPR. If it's Wednesday, it's PR Tech Wednesdays, every Wednesday from 12 to 1 Pacific time. Now, if you're watching this live and you got value from this session, please go to prtechwednesdays.com and register to attend this free weekly PR Tech briefing for more amazing content like this. And if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and like this video. This has been Eric Schwartzman. Thanks so much for joining us.